This talk is about paradigm drift, what happens when real pressure for civilizational change gets diverted into fragmentation, branding, capture, or reaction instead of genuine transformation. By paradigm shift, I mean a real change in the way a society understands reality, organizes institutions, and coordinates action. And there's, many dimensions we can look at that through, and many, paradigm shifts happening and reversing. It's not always linear. And by drift, I mean the appearance of change without enough substance, coherence, or follow through to actually solve the problem. By fliminality, I mean a pseudo-liminal condition where people perform transition, depth, or transformation while quietly reproducing the same bad incentives underneath. By omni-win, I mean a genuinely positive sum future where truth, justice, and coordination reinforce each other than cancel each other out. And my basic claim is that many outcomes are possible, but only one deserves to be called a solution. If we want that solution, to work for everybody, we need to confront reality, cooperate materially, and build coherence together. So starting with this basic game theory choice matrix, because I'm going to show a bunch of these, but this is the most basic and it's kind of, crude. But a lot of game theory comes from like economics and rational choice type stuff. And they're actually, I think a lot of them are kind of bogus thought experiments. I think a lot of thought experiments are. So I've tried to develop some game theory that's more systemic and holistic and about the civilizational trends, but I'm going to bring it down to different levels as well. I'm sure you're familiar with a bunch of different ones. This is a very generic. You get the basic idea, like there's incentives to defect, and depending on which player you are and depending on, what the trade-offs are. But my proposition for us today is that there shouldn't really be much deliberation and choice involved. We should all want to cooperate. It's the most mutually beneficial, and we'll figure out what that means. And then very quickly, like this is what was called the liminal web 5 years ago in 2001. And instead of me, like this isn't a talk about the liminal or fliminal web per se, but instead of me diving into the particulars, I will just say the fliminal web is the shadow of the liminal web. And it kind of affects the entire space, the entire milieu, in various ways, to various degrees, right? And specifically, this model here I'm showing is what that looks like. So the red circle is fliminal web people. The green circle is ostensibly like a gliminal web. All of them are people in my networks. They're people in my orbit. So this is my list of kind of a liminal threshold between friends and enemies. And in the inner circle is just some words to represent some of the problems. If it's elitist or defensive, or if the discourse obfuscates things rather than clarifies things, if there's malpractice, sanitization, laundering. And those are very general. There's a couple more specific at the top there: anti-woke, anti-critical race theory, anti-trans. Behavioral things. Do they block? Are they denialist? Political aspects. Are they Zionist? So, I've done a lot of research and work here, but I just wanted to foreground game theory, liminal web, and the political valence there. You can see we have like a liminal spectrum between left and right, and it kind of leans left while being uncomfortable with that leftism. So where we begin, this is kind of my opening slide, that the core point is truth is harder than distortion. The asymmetry is why drift is normal and repair is difficult. And, I think of a few quotes like the Mark Twain anecdote about, I think it's him, it's easier to fool someone than to convince someone they've been fooled. That's really important at all levels, including the level we're at, of wanting to grok complexity and solve world problems and our own struggles. And then there's a similar quote about a lie traveling halfway around the world before the truth has got its shoes on. Right. But the cleanest framing of that, I think it's from 2013. It's called Brandolini's Law, right? The energy needed, or the amount of work needed to refute bullshit, is an order of magnitude larger than the energy needed to produce it. And an order of magnitude, for anyone who doesn't know, is usually like 10 times. So it's like 10 times the amount of work for me to point out, hey, so-and-so is kind of spreading some misinformation there. It's 10 times the amount of work if, it's rocking the boat and everybody disagrees, and it's hard to, or it's not incentivized to work that out in real time and pinpoint the truth. And we see this at scale. This is how, I think right-wing politics works, is how Trump got into power. And across the spectrum, all the centrist politicians participate in this in their own way. There's a lot of trading off of truth strategically. And, bottom line, this is what gets in the way of paradigm shift. Why have we been trying to achieve a paradigm shift for 100 years with some clarity and lucidity, and it keeps getting captured and derailed, and no, we got to fight this war and that war. A lot of that is based on falsehood, right? I was with what's going on in Iran, I try to explain to people, like, Iran is not developing nuclear weapons. They have a nuclear energy program. But the lie that is shared around the world, including by Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, is like, oh, well, yeah, what Trump is doing is not great. It's violating international law, but we can't let Iran have nukes. So it's very easy for him to get the wrong information, to spread that wrong information, and our best laid plans at correcting that are next to impossible, right? And this is very evident for me watching, TikTokers and content creators get online and work so hard, and constantly they're debunking BS, but it's a constant game of catch up. So falsehood is cheap, repair is expensive. Flattery spreads, ambiguity spreads, prestige laundering spreads, soft capture spreads, vibe spreads. But correction requires memory, courage, coordination, and often conflict. This talk is meant to stimulate you too, and we'll talk about it at the end. But think about, what do we do about that asymmetry of truth? How does real paradigm pressure become paradigm drift? How does real contradiction, which is the trigger for paradigm shift, become branding, pseudo-depth, capture, fragmentation, or reaction? And what kind of choice architecture would help us overcome that? So this is one of my favorites, because this is a long view of that struggle between paradigm shift and paradigm drift, right? And World War I, going all the way back then or just after, is when we have dislocation and system seeds. the idea of paradigm shift back then would be, the old ideas are failing, new ones are emerging, consciousness is evolving, civilization updates itself. This is a very simplified, of course. I wanted to draw attention to particular things. So the next big thing there is security state consolidation, right? And particularly in the US, that's when the military industrial complex really solidified, took root. And that's, ironically, despite Eisenhower's warnings. And then concurrently, we have anti-communism and a lot of right-wing consolidation and mobilization, right? House Un-American Activities Committee and the Red Scare, McCarthyism, and all that. And by the way, because we're going to kind of touch on this, Israel formed in 1948, and with the help of the UK and the US. So that kind of alliance, dark alliance, was there from the beginning to derail paradigm shift, right? And then directly after that, in the 60s, you have the liberation counterculture, civil rights movements, and that's really a vanguard thing. I'm going to touch on that later, but it's very wholesome and holistic, and it got suppressed, it got captured in so many ways, and it got murdered. And there's so many sectors play a role in this, like what's happening in film, what's happening in geopolitics, what's happening in energy, what's happening with the in the 70s with the crystallization, calcification of neoliberalism. Neoliberal captures there on the timeline. And then you can see it's a dialectic, right? So in the next era, kind of the 80s and 90s, we have on the top holism to managerial diffusion. The idea of paradigm shift is becoming more prolific. The whole Earth catalog kind of thing, and all these various think tanks, but then beneath that, the settler colonial geopolitical hardening, Zionist state consolidation, increasing control of the U.S., which we really feel very viscerally today. And then, coming more up to our current era, and this is what I want to focus on, the last 10 years, what I have the most expertise on, and we've all kind of lived through, crisis transition search, right? So the financial crisis, climate crisis, Occupy Wall Street in 2011, and a legitimacy breakdown. And the irony is, right, despite all that breakdown, the wealth gap has increased. That's always the most mind-blowing fact to me. Like, there was this real public mobilization and sentiment, like, okay, everybody, capitalism is extreme. The gap is too big. It's kind of insane. And it's only grown since then. Like, that's just so insanely counterproductive, and that's not even paradigm drift. That's paradigm grift and rift. And so those are the kinds of things we're going to unpack. And so moving into the next slide, this is kind of using deep ecology specifically as an example, because deep ecology sounds like a great idea, but it's always had some fascist undertones, and there's various ways it can be, as we see here, captured, suppressed. There's pathways to drift and pathways to grift, and then it all gets mixed back and sedimented in a new common sense, right? And that new common sense doesn't have to be true. It's just the status quo. It's what people believe. Like, oh yeah, that utopianism, that's not going to work, because this and this, and immigrants want to steal your jobs, and whatever the case may be, right? But I'm these are generated, of course, but there's a lot of background information to it, like in the top left here, contradiction appears, frame crisis is felt, new language of transition emerges, right? And that's when we all get hyped up, like, oh, this sounds wonderful, and I can this language becomes a kind of scaffolding to escape from my anxieties about the world, and then the expansion across domains. But there is a path to real paradigm shift, and it's not one thing, but it's many paths that will converge on one thing. So now we get back into the game theory kind of decision matrix mapping, right? So so the axes are emancipation coherence, transformational clarity on the vertical, and on the horizontal, material and institutional transformation. Like what is actually happening? Like the New Deal in the 30s and 40s, and the high tax rate in the 50s were very material policies and actions that helped manage these crises. And the idea here is that we all want to go from the bottom left, where we kind of are de facto, where everything is, where the crisis begins, with nobody to blame in particular, but of course a lot of these things are ancient, and class struggle and being out of sync with the environment. It says where fascism and things like that operate, keeping us divided and rifted. The grift, just to the right of that, is that managed adaptation. Those regimes of, say, green capitalism, neoliberal capture, right? That in those worlds, those people by and large don't think that they're evil, right? Don't think that they're contributing to the harm. That for them it is the paradigm shift. The part of the neoliberal status quo was literally called the Washington Consensus. Like all these, old white guys got together and like, yeah, we agree, this is what it is. And, free trade, which is fine, but like total unregulated, capital flight is not a good thing. There's no trickle down. And then in the top left, right, you have integral, all these prestige discourse, some metamodernism, metacrisis discourse itself, leaves much to be desired. And through the other slides, we'll kind of unpack like why there's gravity in those other two quadrants. Why are we getting pulled off track if ostensibly we're all pointed in the direction of real shift, right? And you can see some of the examples I have up here: anti-colonial and abolitionist struggles and breakthroughs, Black freedom struggle, labor socialist solidarity traditions. And by the way, the idea of communism, socialism and communism, is older than Marx, right? Like he kind of came into those traditions and formalized it a lot. But communism was already a thing, and I'm gonna give a separate talk about that. But the takeaway there is that communism, let's say in ancient times, in primitive communism, there was a lot of formal egalitarianism, sometimes matriarchy, and just an ethos of sharing. There's no private property, but there is hierarchies for sure, but the land is, the bounty for everybody. And with capitalism, we don't have that. Everything's measured and accounted for to the point of, some people have nothing or their entire lives are exploited. So as we try to move in that direction, though, often through no fault of our own, we're going to get pulled off into one of those other quadrants, either drift or grift, right? Like, oh, I'm going to get a job working for a nonprofit. Like, that's not necessarily grift or drift, but that's just de facto kind of, why do we even have nonprofits instead of a more powerful public state sort of idea? And I think a lot of people who work for nonprofits or the UN or something like that, they get this. They're disillusioned. They're exhausted. They know they're captured to some extent by their donors and their mission. And that puts us all in competition. And I saw a video the other day that's like, this guy was, performatively freaking out, saying like, we're all on the same team. Like, what is this nonsense about competition? Like, competition's fine in certain contexts, but in the grand scheme of things, we're all on the same team. So, how do we commit and to these movements? Abolitionism is about abolishing all kind of oppressive institutions, right? So why should that even be controversial? But there's so many conflicting and competing forces in the world, right? So let's see. I'm just gonna move along here. So based on that, this is kind of what is. This is 4 scenarios that are all constantly unfolding. I always say, like, well, it seems like we're in the reactionary Ragnarok mostly, right? It's not that the others don't exist, but that's what's dominant. So I hope, my hope was, while I'm just babbling, that you're also just taking in the slide and looking around however you want, because there's a lot of information there, right? This is very sort of high level. So just very quickly, right? The top right ostensibly is high coherence, high justice, planetary coordination, bridge building, emancipatory integration. The top left is fragmented solidarities, localized syntheses, partial truths, real care in pockets, like mutual aid is an example, right? So they're not necessarily good or bad things, but on the whole, you can see there's a balkanization that, those efforts are hamstrung because they're not, unified. So there's not enough scalable integration. On the bottom right, this is also very dominant, Technocratic Plateau. This is Davos. This is things like that, right? This is every world leader for the most part, but there are exceptions, right? I think, I love to see when very left-leaning politicians rock the boat, right? Whether it's the president of Mexico or Lula in Brazil. And then, of course, like the history of, assassinations of really good, ostensibly good leaders that, want to nationalize their industries for their citizens or wherever it may be, right? Like, we're, especially in North America, which is where most of us live, we need to be so aware of Western hegemony and American exceptionalism, because I think on a daily basis we're still learning how bad it is, how bad it's been, and I'll talk a lot about that in my conspiracy talk. Like, all this Epstein stuff is bottomless because it's connected to that whole Technocratic Plateau and the neo-tribal Oases and the Reactionary Ragnarok, right? They're directly funding um, all the bad stuff we see. I saw something just yesterday that Epstein was involved in helping get Tommy Robinson in the UK released out of prison. Like they were like paying for his legal fees and everything, and it just doesn't end, right? So yeah, the bottom left, fragmented authoritarianism, scapegoating, breakdown, collapse, grievance, coercive simplification. So, not every form of coherence is good. If that puts us into the top left, into the neo-tribal oases and drift, and not every form of fragmentation is liberatory. The challenge is integrated epistemics, how we access knowledge, plus emancipatory politics. So here is a meta-crisis choice architecture, kind of echoing my first slide with the game theory. Do we when confronted with these facts and options, do we defect or cooperate, or do we deny or confront? In the denial, climate denial, bunker logic, again, scapegoating, ignoring contradictions until they explode. This feeds reaction and breakdown and makes that feel natural. And I think MAGA and Christofascism and Zionism are deeply within that kind of cult logic, and it's some break away. It's beautiful when they break away, but by and large, moneyed interests are promoting that. They're promoting those narratives, so they can squeeze every dollar out of us and have our lives very conveniently kind of railroaded. Confront but defect. Everybody sees the crisis, but nobody coordinates. Right, that's the drift. I'm making sure all these quadrants match each other. Neo-tribal silos, grievance loops, feudalism. It feeds drift and civilizational breakdown. Deny and cooperate. That's where you get the greenwashing, soothing, managed narratives, which at this point is just so cringe, right? Like when you see that, and we may even still fall for it sometimes. Or the people making the advertisements or running these fair trade companies or whatever, like maybe they're being deceived as well. It's just so many lies on lies, and it feeds that plateau, that technocratic capture. And that's what I worry about with a leader like Mark Carney. And yeah, we'll get to, how obviously drift and sort of the grift are they're still better than the lower left, but we can do better. That's the promise. Let's see here. Okay. So coming back to the fliminal web, right? The broader civilizational logic shows up concretely in prestige ecosystems and intellectual networks. And it's not limited to the fliminal web. I have much bigger maps that show this, throughout time, that 100-year history kind of thing. But this is where we are. This is our milieu, and this is, we need a common decision framework. So again, I want it to be obvious that we should all acknowledge and cooperate, right? So name harms, share receipts, change incentives, repair trust through material accountability. It's the only route out of paradigm drift. The drift, acknowledge but defect, like admit some problems and then posture and jockey. This has happened a lot. A lot of people have told me, yeah, you're right about this and that, Brent. And yeah, you got me there, but nothing's going to change. So there's selective honesty, factionalism, pseudo-reckoning, and it produces resentment and more drift. So, like those who saw my metabolizing the meta-crisis talk and my post, I said I've been involved in this kind of stuff for 10 years, kind of actively. Um, and I can tell you, like, concretely, and I think a lot of people can see it and agree, regardless of their role in it. It's like, yeah, we've been drifting for 10 years. We haven't really accomplished a lot. We've failed 3 major US elections in a row. We failed the UK election and Brexit. And by the way, right, Epstein again, Steve Bannon, all these things go directly back to those hostile right-wing actors. Deny and cooperate, right? And this is also a lot of the pattern we see: the invitations, the flattering, the reframing, and avoiding substance, right? Just kind of prestige laundering, I call it. It co-ops critique into vibe and discourse. Like, yeah, we're doing the thing. We're having authentic conversations. And that preserves the network without accountability. And then the worst of this, which we all maybe do to some extent, I probably have fliminal qualities, let's say, but I don't block people, and I advise people not to block. And I see right-leaning people block, and I see left-wing friends block, fascists, whatever. And I, just as a rule, I don't think that accomplishes anything. Like, okay, you're trying to curate your feed, you're trying to clean house, and you want to have a healthy online experience, and that's understandable. But for me, I don't expect social media to be a pleasant experience. There's a higher purpose, and I want to be able to see fascists. I try to talk to them. I try to talk to Zionists. I don't want them to become invisible and forgotten in my window and experience. So protect status by refusing critique, hardens fliminal closure, right? So this is the worst of it. And I've documented a lot of that. And it happens in so many ways, right? Again, it depends on the issue, and how people think of these things and deal with that. The upward slope matters. Recognition alone is not enough. Only acknowledgement paired with cooperation and incentive change exits the trap. So here's another sort of, this is a more of a synthesis and more of a deeper exploration of those future scenarios with, so it's a little bit redundant, but it's a little bit fresh as well. Here we have, again, the contradictions appear, whether historically or in our moment. Frame crisis is felt. New language of institutions emerge. And again, it's, crisis is seen, but coordination fails. Sorry, there's some redundancies, and there'll be the odd typo and stuff on these, but by and large, they're pretty accurate. Meta talk outruns institutional redesign. I mean, there's lots of reasons for this. On some level, I think some of us accept that the meta talk is its own thing. It is what it's supposed to be, because if we're not in those institutions, we can't change them overnight. But again, it's just about recognizing what the pattern is that we're a part of, and what all these directional arrows, how deep ecology gets dragged into drift or down into grift, and how, when we're talking about these problems, like deep ecology is largely about nature, let's say, but we don't want to entertain any of these utopian things without trying to zoom out even further again and say, okay, how does it all connect? What role does monetization play? What role do bad actors play? The next one, personal orientation. Now I'm trying to bring it down to the level of the individuals in this group. Okay, what do we do about it? What do I do about it? How do I think? How do I behave? How do I allocate my time? The main decision rule: choose what increases both coherence and contribution. One without the other reproduces drift. I think a lot of us are striving, right? That's why. So I think there's more drifting than grifting in these spaces, is what I'm trying to say. The grifting we see on the right and at the institutional level a lot. But the drifting is just sort of, I don't want to say our inadequacy, but our necessary kind of shortfall. Fragmented activism, right? I mean, there's so many causes, so many movements, too many to be a part of, and I'm interested in how they converge and how we see by design they've been split up. And it's so, thinking back to that long view of history, it's so important to recognize, like, oh, there was a big labor movement there, and oh, they made some gains, and then oh, it was crushed. Like, and then we're kind of educated to have a not very great historical memory of these things, right? So it takes an enormous amount of effort to care and to put yourself on a life path of, working for justice and secular humanism, and just trying to, find the best recipe for personal and collective paradigm shift. The status quo is for a lot of people is survival, right? And so that's, coming back to those more mainstream decision theory things. Like, a lot of them come from economics, and they're like, oh, what does a rational buyer do in this situation? Or what is the prisoner's dilemma, right? Well, it depends. Like, what's your environment? How constrained are your choices and your ideas about those choices? Right. So, survival, right? We're all kind of trapped in that. And so the more people are in survival mode, right, the worse kind of repetitive systemic outcomes, right? You're always getting that bottom left quadrant. And then the bottom right, that grift again, right? This is where we see a lot of that language of growth, optimization, and not inherently bad things, right? Prone to lifestyle enlightenment, right? Rather than like social collective enlightenment. Can build coherence, but mostly for private benefit or profit. Self-development, therapy, productivity, career upgrading. Again, we're all trapped by it, right? So I think this is the drift and grift are where people's ambitions to go into alignment into that top right intersect with real world constraints, real world scarcity, and conflict. So, okay, a couple more slides. So that's the personal, right? And we're each going to have different experiences and reflections of that. But then I thought, let's apply the same thing to Limicon itself. What is the possibility matrix for Limicon? What has it done in the past? What is it doing now? What could it do? Are there critiques against what I'm saying? Am I oversimplifying? We can get into that. But if it drifts, it looks like this, rich conversation, but weak integration, many meaningful sessions, but few shared next steps, personal insight without field level consequence, and the event feels nourishing, but leaves little durable structures. And then the grift side of that, good branding, weak accountability, meta-crisis language without concrete redistribution or voice of power, networking and visibility outpace contribution. The field is stabilized socially without being transformed materially. And And again, I'm not saying any of this is easy, like, or that it's anyone's fault. That's the idea of this framing, is to, sort of, let's say, address the elephant in the room, and then, just sort of deconstruct it and reconstruct it, and, free that elephant from captivity. Obviously, rift is worst case scenario. I'm not even saying that's that common, but shift is that aspirational, horizon that we want to pursue that and achieve that without deluding ourselves too. I don't think it's going to be easy. We can't just say, well, we did it. We got through the slides and we all chose the top right quadrant. I think there's a lot of work to be done, right? Honest inquiry paired with synthesis and action. Emergent themes becomes projects, alliances, archives, practices. We're already doing that. And we almost have too many projects, too many alliances, networks. It's like, I don't know how y'all feel, but I'm overwhelmed. And it's, AI is this double-edged sword, where we're all empowered and we're all captured to various degrees. But we got a whole month to think and talk about these things. And then finally, so kind of as a counterpoint to this first slide of, what do we do with BS and how that spreads and is an order of magnitude more of a problem, and pseudoscience and disinformation, the only real exit is confront, cooperate, cohere. You remove one, confrontation without cooperation, you get fragmentation. Cooperation without confrontation, you get capture. Coherence without justice, technocracy. So the way I've framed it, I think it just becomes more and more evident and kind of channels us into a common direction. Okay, we're back. I see we got 17 people here now. So thank you, everybody. It's nice to see you all now. Ardell, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. I, first of all, really in-depth analysis, and thank you for all of that. I just wanted to say, with the point about that Limicon you posited doesn't do concrete redistribution, you might not have been at the pitch session at the end, and there was some actual concrete funds redistribution. That's all. Thanks.
Oh, last year, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm open to it. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it for myself, but also, yeah, I wasn't aware of that and where money went and what happened with any of that. So
yeah, I can discuss with you later, because I kept.
I would actually say all the funds are redistributed back into the field if you consider that anything that doesn't go into Pitch Fest or expenses gets given to people who are working and putting their time and energy into the field and don't get paid for any of this. So I make about 0.01 cent an hour for hosting Limicon from the money that I made from it last year. And we try to support many people in the field, like anybody who steps up in Limicon and does that. We try to invite them into sharing that profit as well. So
yeah, that's great. That's great. You're doing it right there, and I would say I would do the same if I had any cash flow and budget for my think tank project. I kind of dream of having enough to like throw little grants to friends, but I think as a whole this space doesn't have enough big donors, so there's not a lot to go around. But yeah. Anybody else? I have, just in case, I have like a sample Q&A as well, to sort of anticipate questions I would get. Atasha, go ahead.
Yeah, I heard you mention AI briefly, but I'm curious, if you see any ways the AI offers, especially if it continues along an exponential curve, as the techno-optimists think it might or will. Do you see probable ways that that can be leveraged to achieve the types of goals that you want to achieve?
Yeah, when I look at the field of AI and the deployment, I see everything happening all at once. I see the Terminator 2 stuff, which is absolutely insane. And whatever other sci-fi dystopia, where they're targeting people. I think it's great that these megacorps, as much as they suck, that these are like publicly available tools. And, so each individual has their own challenges of what to do with that, how much time they spend using it to learn, to audit themselves, versus just creating slop or buttressing their own priors. So, and I also think it kind of does go back to those quadrants, let's say, where there's people abusing AI, corporations abusing AI. And there's so much happening at once, and so much will happen in the next few years, right? We're all constantly getting whiplash. And we're going to continue to get whiplash. So personally, I'm just trying to use AI the best I can, to teach it, to humanize AI, and to have it bootstrap the best of my abilities, right? So try to use it a lot for research, just to keep my presentation simple. And it was extremely high level because I have a few reports, like white papers on paradigm drift, but I didn't really touch on any of that. I just wanted to keep it based on the slides, right? So I literally generated all the slides in a crude form over the past few days, and then had Nano Banana just polish them up, right? And then it's like, okay, here we go. I'm just going to sort of follow what I created with AI. And I think what we're seeing as well, like there's an app called Worldview that a guy made over a weekend. He's like an ex-Google guy, and it's like my Metaglobe thing that, like he's out competing Palantir, sort of like just like that, right? So it's like, okay,
Yeah, I saw
this,
that.
yeah,
That's incredible. Yeah, that's an incredible video.
yeah, and that's the intention of those kinds of people. Like, we don't need these extremely greedy, extremely paranoid and state violence oriented and profit driven. Like, we don't need them at all. But they've convinced the system that they're needed, and vice versa. So that's my hope for the horizon of AI, that we start to make a lot of these sectors public utilities, take ownership. We tax the billionaires. We put some of them in prison, and because AI is not going anywhere, right? It's a supplement to our daily lives. I every night when I go to bed, I say, "Hey Google, turn off lamp." I'm hands free. I'm living in the future, and I'm not gonna not do that. Just to stay more grounded. There's other ways to stay grounded, right? So yeah. Who else has a question or wants to speak on anything? And I'll keep going if while people are thinking. Like, let's say a question is, isn't this too moralistic? And I would say, yeah, it's normative because it distinguishes viable solutions from failure models, and it's also descriptive. The point is not that the bad quadrants are imaginary; they're real, and that's inadequate. Okay, Gian, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Brown. I'm so sorry I missed the bulk of it, but I'm so glad I got that you went a little longer. I mean, I caught the quadrants and some of it. I think if, Bucky Fuller said making the old obsolete, which you all probably know. So I'm approaching some design schools where I went to school. And so design thinking in terms of innovation and how to use the technology innovatively, if we're all traumatized and we're all programmed through controls of fear, and I am too, and I sit around and I'm like, somebody said, I think David Sedaris came here and I got free tickets, so I went, and he pulls through and he says, I hate everyone. And the whole upper balcony and the lower balcony all laugh hysterically. And we live in Iowa nice, and everyone's really nice, and they smile at me because we're in a red state and immigration, and they want the Asian person to feel like welcome and belonging. So even in a nice community, everyone's like, I hate everybody. So I've been thinking a lot of, I've just been experiencing this, like, I hate you too. I hate y'all. You're all stupid. You're all like, how can we, the system's stupid. I just went to the doctor. I'm like, oh yeah. And even this technology is stupid, like all the things, like how it's so corrupt and greedy and all the things, right? So I sit there in this cycle of like, I'm actually blissed out and grateful and blessed, but I'm also hating. So there's this, like, how do I internally and then externally reconcile? So I bonded with the tech, and I'm like, you're the best tech ever. Like, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't come for my fucking mammogram because I fucking hate it, right? So at that moment, I realized, based on what you're saying about this personal quadrant versus this external quadrant, that we're all sort of like spinning. We're made to spin in the wrong direction all the time. But there's also the field that you talked about that's the opposite spin. And once we recognize that, recognitize our brain to that, but we also perceive it. So part of this, like what I love about what you're doing, and it's ballsy, so keep going. And if you ever need like support or whatever, like reach out. The importance of what people like that are here are doing, and also like self being, like recognizing it, like in like getting about themselves.
Recording in progress.
Should I keep going, or have I?
Yeah, sorry, there was a pop-up. Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so when we design the thing that is not only left and right brain coherence, but heart coherence and then gut coherence. So we are already aligning and attuning to the innate embodied chakra energies, which get us to seventh dimensional experiences as the creators or co-creators. And Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Tafori is doing that in Africa, and it may start in places that are less Western intellectual technology, like simple-hearted people. So as Ibrahim Tafori is doing it, and he's in Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, all the other countries are starting to also say, oh, okay, we can't let our brother. And there's the United States of Africa that is starting, and as all these decolonization start to so healing the earth, like heal. So there's so like, I guess my long-winded way of saying healing, and then like, so we're not projecting into the future our traumatized hate, fear controls mechanism, self healing, and then like bliss states. Like I saw this, I had this vision of like, oh my God, even my, annoying, like even my sisters who are traumatized, all the things, I can't even talk to them because they're just so, even my sisters are going to experience a bliss when we all experience this bliss state, which is an embodied state of consciousness, an expanded state of consciousness, direct experience, what's possible in our, not projecting into the future, but sort of remembering how nature's already operating within us and then without us. And there's a coherence, right? The gap, the conceptual gap has been closed. And that's why Africa's so successful, because they don't have the Western like separation of mind body. They don't have all these like structures projected onto their thought forms, and they're cognizant and living with their ancestors. The veil is so thin. They're living with, like, indigenous communities live with the aliens already for years. And so I just think maybe the models aren't in our cultural psyche, and maybe they go back to where I think I make a deep critique of Ken Wilber, is that we thought we evolved out of some ancient ancestral, but really the wisdom that's emergent there is the feminine divine, and it really will balance out the opposite of the spin. It'll actually be the core, our ground of being and becoming. And when we when we remember that, which is so like innate, when we remember that either through courses or whatever, I think that's where everyone already belongs, and everyone already knows, and everyone already gets. Like, that's the shift, I think. Did you already talk about all this and I'm being totally redundant?
No, it's okay, but let me address a couple things you said. The first thing about hating everybody. I saw this meme a couple weeks ago that I shared, and it was like there's two types of people. One who I forget, one who loves everybody but like acts against the common interest, something like that, and then one who hates everybody but is working for greater humanity. And I'm the latter. I also hate everybody. But that's like motivated by a deeper love, right? And commitment. And then the other thing, just you're saying about Africa and all that, and matriarchy or feminism and indigenous stuff, is like, yeah, that's all more like circle oriented, and the West is more line oriented, and capitalist. We're all trapped. We're all brainwashed, and we have Stockholm syndrome with capitalism. Like, well, there's no other way. But really, at a root level, it's very philosophical and ideological. Like, well, do you want your neighbor to eat? Or are you trapped in a nationalist scale of things? Like, oh, well, my country first, and then, all of those are traps, right? And the way out is to, keep thinking on higher and higher levels. But then there's traps and holes in those things as well. So I'll touch on those things more like in my other talks, because I think we need to educate each other what the giant institutional trap is, right? And because with Africa, everybody knows Africa is like the richest continent, but it's the most impoverished, right? Because the West historically has extracted trillions and is still extracting and is still keeping these leaders divided and blocking Pan-African movements, right? And that's insane. That's absolutely insane. And we're all so thoroughly brainwashed by like, oh, this guy's bad. Oh, Gaddafi's bad. Oh, Saddam Hussein's bad. It's like, listen to the people who are saying that. They are just as bad, if not worse. And so, yeah, we got a lot of work to do, like geopolitically, to outmaneuver that. Yeah. So let me go to Kirsty, and then Nzai, you had your hand up. If you want to go after that, go ahead, Kirsty.
Hello. That was really amazing. A lot of these things are new to me. A lot of these terms are very new, so I didn't even know what the liminal or fliminal web was, but I definitely have been on it now that I know what it is. And so they were like maps, and it was like, oh, I could locate myself in different areas. So that was really helpful. And then as this sort of like four kind of structure was repeated, it started to make us wonder, look at it as a house as well, because it seemed that I saw coherence is a word I hear a lot since coming here, and this seems to be often conflated or connected with productivity. And sometimes with the whole awakened metaphor stuff, I'm sometimes like, but you need to sleep where things that sleep. And so I'm wondering to what extent, if you could make this full thing into a house, because what if like certain human needs are in each of these? And so if they turn into rooms as opposed, like for instance, I know that regressive, maybe that corner, the bottom left corner, is maybe the necessary, because it was also, there was mining and blindfolds and all exhaustion. And so this in terms of just this necessity for that kind of like, which can become, if people aren't given that or neglected from having that kind of rest in internal space, I think people can then become extremely, a lot of our symptoms that were in there. So yeah, I'm wondering if these, yeah, I guess coherence and consciousness, and is consciousness supposed to always be productive? And I guess it makes us think of psychoanalysis and the idea of the dream and the analyzing, and then the dream and the analyzing. So yeah, that's the first things that made us think. But yeah, I really appreciate it.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think, you know, my choice to focus on this particular game theory kind of choice architecture and framing is in some ways limited, and we can think of like other types of vertical stacks, let's say, whether for your personal journey or professional development, or the big picture of it all. So yeah, it's always a trade-off, like when you're simplifying things, like in that long view of history, like I'm glossing over so much, or like assuming people can fill in the blanks somewhat. But I think they're, you know, coming back to this word coherence, right? It's like, if you find another model, or if I develop another model, are they actually compatible, or is there friction between them? Or like, right, how do we address all the friction and different perspectives in this room? And it's a constant test, I guess, of what is actually cohering, what is actually sticking.
This was such an interesting talk, and I think for me what it brought up was, I'll give you an example. I'm in the global south, and it's been so interesting lately because a big conversation that's happening is, you know, climate change, sustainability. NGOs are mushrooming left, right, and center. And what's happening is that when you use the word climate change, you are excused from any harm that you cause. So what's happening is big corporations from the West are coming in, and they are like, well, actually, we need to, you know, save the world. We need sustainability. We need to, you know, climate change is a real problem. And they are buying up hectares and hectares of land to sort of, you know, make it more sustainable. And what's happening is that it's not that there was no one on the land to begin with. There were people, and they're like, yeah, but their practices were not good. They were cutting up trees for firewood to make a livelihood. They were killing animals to feed their families, and that's wrong. And we need to sort of reforest a lot of these spaces. Or what ends up happening is a lot of the times they even build eco-lodges, right? And you find that they zone out certain spaces for people to do hunting for sport. So it was not okay for pastoralists to kind of hunt for food. And what's happening is that it almost feels like a lot of this language of, you know, meta crisis, climate change is becoming almost a curse word for a lot of communities, because I mean, for example, in East Africa, in Kenya, it's become a really big problem that some communities were being given as little as $5, okay, to get them off these lands that they have existed on for centuries, where this is where their ancestors are buried, and they're like, yeah, but we need to sort of, you know, sort this out. And of course, corrupt politicians are happy to lie to these people, and it becomes so sad because there are some conversations that need to happen, right, about climate change, but it is being done so corruptly, you know, in a way that extracts, that people don't even want to engage in things like you say climate change, and people are like, I do not want to talk to you. People hear words like meta crisis, they're like, that sounds like the kind of words that people use when they want to extract. And so I found this conversation to be so vital, because I think you get to show how, if one is not careful, you can get completely swept away by the right terminologies and the right wording, but it's used completely to disrupt people's lives. And it's like, it's not, yeah, it's almost like, how do we design systems not only to sustain the current systems, but to increase capacity for life itself for everybody? And yeah, I genuinely feel like this is such a interesting conversation. I've been in a lot of spaces where we are having the right conversations, but I feel like maybe because of where I come from, the language almost matches the kind of extractive language that is used to almost recolonize our continent. And it just makes me feel a bit like, so I really found this valuable. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And yeah, like everything you said is amazing. And that's what I'm trying to compliment, right? Because that's been my experience too, watching these thought leaders and gurus and stuff talk about the meta crisis. It becomes immediately a way for them to wash their hands of the specificity of the problem and how we're all, especially Western white people, are complicit in it. And with all these NGOs and, you know, people trying to make macro solutions to climate change and stuff, and the way that drifts and grifts, right? Because I don't think they're aware of it. And we have to impose the questions, like, because there is malice and there is ignorance, and in a given case, right, is somebody's, you know, false authority over you, and how much money they give you and what you do with it, is that motivated on some deep level by white supremacy or white ignorance? Because they're different, you know, sides of the same beast. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of these elites, they just don't know. They're not self-aware of you know, the trade-offs and the damage this stuff creates. Like you say, buying up all the land. Sorry, what where are you? What country? I'm just curious.
In South Africa, but a lot of this is happening a lot in East Africa.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to talk more about all that. And yeah, just quickly, and then I'll go to Jian. I want to reemphasize how this is happening on so many levels at once, right? So I use the fliminal web as one sort of microcosm case study, but it's happening in all these other pockets and levels simultaneously. And I think about climate change a lot. I don't know what else to call it, but I also agree with you totally. Like, it's kind of a term that obscures and kind of does damage. Yeah, it's just ironic that a lot of the solutions being proposed at the highest levels are so counterproductive and counterintuitive. So you know, comes back to like abolition. We really need to abolish that hegemony and empower people. Like, in that gap in between, you know, everything needs to serve people's humanity and entrepreneurial spirit. To, you know, free education, free healthcare, free, because that, first of all, that's all affordable, right? And then that's what makes freedom in the abstract possible and distributed and just.